Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcrop TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching this episode here on Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. Today we will be covering the Scythian Empire and the Macedonian Empire, as well in the style of Plutarch's Parallel Lives, probably the most influential book in my life at least. We will cover two leaders from each respective empire. In this case, we will have Ateas of the Sythian Empire and Philip II of the Macedonian Empire. You might be wondering, why are we not covering Alexander the Great of the Macedonian Empire, probably the most significant conqueror of that empire? Well, I previously covered Alexander the Great in a previous episode of Guide of Ancient Greek and Roman History based off Plutarch's Parallel Lives. Plutarch does have a specific biography of Alexander, so please refer to that. And I also think by covering Philip II was also a very significant leader in the Macedonian Empire, and generally, so I think it's important and to study. And through effect, we will still cover a couple anecdotes about Alexander the Great as well. So, without further ado, and at the very end we will have a comparison between Ateas and Philip II to perhaps learn a little bit more about both leaders and both their respective empires in the style of Plutarch's Parallel Lives. So, without further ado, we will start with the first empire and the first leader. So, the Sythian Empire, also known as Sythia, was a vast nomadic confederation that existed in the Eurasian steppes from the 8th century BCE, or perhaps even 900 BCE, to the 3rd century BCE. This empire played a significant role in shaping the geopolitical landscape of Central Asia and had a complex history marked by periods of expansion, cultural exchange, and eventual decline. We will seek to find the rise and fall of this empire. Starting with the rise of the Scythian Empire from the perhaps 900 or 800 BCE to the 4th century BCE. So the origins and early expansion from the 8th to the 7th century BCE, the Scythians were an Indo-Iranian nomadic people who emerged in the region of the Altai Mountains, encompassing parts of modern-day Russia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Mongolia. They were known for their mastery of mounted warfare and skill in archery, as we can see in some of the depictions on the slide, if you can see it. As for their expansion into Central Asia from the 6th to the 5th century BCE, by the 6th century BCE, the Scythians had expanded westward into Central Asia, where they came into contact with various sedentary civilizations, including the Achaemenid Empire of Persia, which we have previously covered and I hope you have or will check out. This interaction influenced Scythian culture, leading to the adoption of some Persian customs and the use of the Old Persian script. So my analysis here is that these were nomadic people with mastery of both horses and bows, so they were able to often easily conquer and defeat people without manipulation of horses or archery. So quite innovative in warfare, relatively. As for their zenith of power in the 4th century BCE, and following up into coming up close to their eventual decline, start with their conflict with the Achaemenid Empire. So the Achaemenid Empire, which we previously covered, was the most powerful empire and the largest empire up until its date, and even till now, one of the most significant empires of all time. As we shall see, the Achaemenid Empire actually encompassed more land even than the Macedonian or Alexander the Great conquered. So this is in the 4th century BCE we are now discussing. So the Scythians clashed with the Achaemenid Empire, particularly during the reign of Darius I, one of the leaders of the Achaemenid Empire. This clash, he reigned from 522 to 486 BCE. The Persians attempted to conquer Scythian territories, but ultimately the Scythians managed to resist and maintain their independence. So this is a very significant achievement because the Achaemenid Empire pretty much was able to conquer anyone that they endeavored to. But the Scythians, at least for a time, were able to hold out. Furthermore, there was cultural flourishing during this period. The Scythian art and craftsmanship reached its zenith. They produced intricate golden artifacts, some of which we can see on the slide and we'll discuss soon, as often associated with elaborate burial rituals. These objects are now valuable archaeological finds, shedding light on Scythian society. But moving to the decline and fragmentation, circa 300 BCE into the 2nd century BCE, with the Sarmatian incursions. So the Scythian Empire faced increasing pressure from the Sarmatians, another nomadic group in the east. The Sarmatians encroached on Scythian territory, leading to territorial losses and internal conflicts. So my estimation here is that these Sarmatians also had like the mastery of cavalry and also had the usage of the bows, so they're sort of competing apples to apples here, and in this case reached many defeats. As for Roman and Chinese relations, the Scythians maintained contact with both the Roman Empire, which we will discuss soon, to the west, and the Han dynasty of China to the east, so sort of in the middle ground between two very powerful empires. These interactions facilitated trade and cultural exchange, but also exposed the Scythians to external pressures. As for division and disintegration, moving to the 1st century BCE to the 2nd century CE. By the 1st century BCE, internal divisions weakened the Scythian Empire, and it began to fragment into smaller, more localized groups. This process was accelerated by the pressures from external forces, including the expansion of the Roman Empire. So, we often come to the question, do the internal pressures or the external pressures cause the decline of an empire? My estimation is that they sort of feed into one each other. If there are external pressures, they're more likely to be internal strife, and if there's internal strife, the external pressures are more strongly felt. As for the end of the Scythian Empire in the 3rd century CE, Hunnic and Gothic invasions. In the 3rd century CE, already significantly fragmented. I would not, even at this point, consider the Scythian Empire to still be an empire, but the Scythian territories came under increasing pressures from migrations of Huns and Goths, both of whom sought new lands for settlement. These invasions further fractured Scythian unity. As for assimilation and legacy, as the Scythian identity began to fade, many Scythians assimilated into neighboring cultures. Some migrated westward, contributing to the formation of new groups in Europe. The legacy of Scythians endured through their influence on cultures of the steppe and their impact on the historical record. Thus, the Scythian Empire's rise and fall were emblematic of the complex interplay between nomadic and sedentary civilizations in ancient Eurasia. While their empire eventually dissolved, their cultural contributions and influence endured in the regions they once dominated. So this is not, this is one of maybe a great example of sometimes nomadic people have defeated sedentary societies, as we'll see much later. Genghis Khan, kings 1,000 years later, once again was a revival of nomadic superiority, but often cases the sedentary peoples have been more powerful, such as the Romans. But nonetheless, the rise and fall of the Scythian Empire has the Scythian descendants are dispersed throughout Eurasia and can be found in both regions, and it's left large cultural impact. As for the leader, we will highlight Ateas. So the Scythian Empire was primarily a confederation of tribes, and it did not have a singular ruler or central authority in the traditional sense. So very much different from, on the extreme, we have the Egyptian model where the pharaoh is absolute leader, absolute centralized government. The Scythians would be on the other end of the spectrum where there's really not too much of a centralized leader. Instead, leadership was often distributed amongst various tribal chiefs and leaders who held sway over different regions of the empire. However, one of the most notable figures in Scythian history is Ateas, a prominent chieftain who played a significant role in the empire's affairs during the 4th century BCE, so we found one to highlight. So name Ateas, life period, approximately 387 BCE to 329 BCE. So starting with his early life and rise to power, Ateas emerged as a prominent Scythian leader during the 4th century BCE. a period marked by both internal consolidation and external challenges. He was known for his tactical prowess in warfare and his ability to unite various Scythian tribes under his banner. As for the conflict with the Achaemenid Empire, Ateas is best known for his resistance against the Achaemenid Empire, which sought to expand its influence into territories of the Scythians. So this is a very, very significant achievement. So anyone who was able to hold back the powerful Achaemenid Empire, the most powerful at the time and up until that date, is a huge achievement. In 339 BCE, Ateas led a successful campaign against the Persians, inflicting significant losses and forcing them into retreat. So that's a massive achievement. And it must be noted that the Achaemenid empires did have usage of cavalry, but maybe less advanced in that area as the Scythians. As for cultural exchange and contacts, Ateas's reign also saw increased interaction between the Scythians and neighboring civilizations, particularly the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire, or the old First Persian Empire. This contact influenced Scythian culture, leading to the adoption of some Persian customs and the use of Old Persian script. As for his legacy and influence, Ateas's achievements and leadership left a lasting legacy among the Scythian tribes. His ability to unify disparate groups and successfully defend Scythian territories against external threats contributed to the empire's stability during his reign. It's a very significant achievements, but it's also important to note that although he was fighting the Achaemenids, he was open to accepting some of their influences too, so he wasn't too much of a I guess he was able to recognize the advantages of the Achaemenids. He wasn't just an enemy of them. As for his death and succession, Ateas's exact fate is uncertain, as historical records from this period are limited. Some accounts suggest that he died in battle, while others propose he may have been assassinated. Following his death, the Scythian Empire faced challenges in maintaining the unity and stability that Ateas had worked to establish. So maybe he could be considered one of the last shining stars of the many chieftains of the Scythian Empire. Furthermore, it is important to note that due to limited availability of this historical record from this period, some aspects of Ateas's life and reign remain subject to scholarly debate and interpretation. Nonetheless, Ateas stands out as a key figure in the complex tapestry of Scythian history, and one of the few to be able to hold back the powerful Achaemenid Empire. So now discuss the content of this slide. So title, we have Ateas and the Scythian Empire, who are also called the Pontiac Scythians, and they were an equestrian nomadic people. Significant leader, Ateas. Empire, Sythia. Period, circa 900 to circa 300 BCE. The Scythians still did exist even into the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is often considered between 300 BCE to 300 CE, or even further, but nonetheless, by that point, that's kind of the period in which they were an empire, up until 300 BCE. Modern location, Ukraine and southern Russia. Million square kilometers, 1.00, so very, very large, actually. Million square miles, 0.39%, of the world, 0.74%. So very, very significant, especially for just a nomadic people. Capital city was Kamianka. Government, monarchy, which is, but that's probably, maybe I should revise that. I think it's more local chieftains. But there was maybe one centralized leader. Maybe Ateas was more considered a leader. And maybe what is meant by this is that the different chieftains are considered domestic monarchs. Common languages, Scythian, Akkadian, Median, Phrygian, Urartian, Thracian, Greek, Proto-Slavic language, and Maeotian. So combination of many different languages, but Scythian would have been probably the predominant one. The point was that they conquered so many peoples and they included those languages. Religion, Scythian, ancient Mesopotamian, Urartian, Phrygian, Iranic, Thracian, and Greek. Population would be in the millions. As for the images, in the top left we have a coin which supposedly has an image of Ateas on it. To the right we have a sword very well preserved with some gold on it. To the right we have a comb made of gold, which may perhaps for ceremonial purposes or just for beautification. Maybe gives us an insight into sort of how much they valued appearance, beauty. Below that we have a soldier who is holding a bow and a spear. Oh, pardon me, an axe and a bow is what it's supposed to be. Below that we have a battle between the Achaemenids and the Scythians. To the right we have another image of a Scythian holding a bow, so a very significant weapon of theirs. Above that we have a golden belt buckle. To the right we have an image, they're famous apparently on the grave of Xerxes. They had they're known for having the pointed hats, Xerxes the First. So as we'll see, that contrasts the Macedonians, who are known to have the round caps. To the right we have a shortened timeline of the Scythian Empire. So Scythian migration from Central Asia to the Caucasian steppe in the 9th to the 8th century BCE. To the Scythian alliance with the Neo-Assyrian Empire in 672 BCE. To the Scythian conquest of Media, we've covered Media, the Median Empire in 652 BCE. The Scythian defeat of the Crimarians in 630s BCE. The Median revolt against the Scythians in 625 BCE. The Scythian raid in Levant till Egypt, 620 BCE. The Medo-Babylonian conquest of the Assyrian Empire, 614 to 612 BCE. The expulsion of Scythians from the West Asia by the Medians in 600 BCE. The Persian invasion in 513 BCE. The war with Macedonia, 340 to 339 BCE. Celtic, Getic, and Germanic invasions of Sythia in the 4th century BCE. And the Sarmatian invasion of Sythia in the 3rd century BCE, or Sarmatian, pardon me. So, as we've covered quite a few of these empires, we've covered so far the Medians, we've covered as well the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, so many different parallels here. So, very important empire to understand the interplays between these empires, and I hope you endeavor or have checked out those empires as well, which I have covered, and some of these more I will cover as well. I've also covered the Persian, or the Old Persian, which is the Achaemenid Empire. And we will cover the Macedonian shortly. And in the top right we have a map of the Scythian kingdom in West Asia in 680 to 600 BCE, which I believe was the peak of its geographical extent. So we can see it extends into Phrygia, it extends into Medes, or Media, and all the way up into Russia, modern day Russia, very far to the north as well. So a massive area of land, probably facilitated by their mastery of cavalry or mastery of horses. So that is Ateas and the Scythian Empire, and we'll discuss the leader a bit more after we discuss Philip II and the Macedonian Empire, a very, very important empire and leader. So the history of Macedonia is a complex tale that spans several centuries. Thus we will seek to find a detailed account of both its rise and fall. The kingdom was founded and initially ruled by the royal Argead dynasty, which was followed by the Antipatrid and the Antigonid dynasties. So there are technically 3 dynasties. For some of these empires, we focused on one specific dynasty. Sometimes we focused on many. It was a decision. I was originally going to just cover the Alexandrian period, but as I've already covered Alexander the Great in the style of Plutarch's Parallel Lives in Ancient Greek and Roman History series, I think it's important to cover the whole length of the Macedonian Empire. And they were very influential before Alexander the Great as well. So starting with the rise of Macedonia from the 7th to the 4th century BCE, starting with the early Macedonian period from the 7th to the 5th century BCE. The region of Macedonia, located in northern Greece, was inhabited by a distinct Greek-speaking population. Early Macedonian kings, such as Perdiccas I, established a monarchy in the 7th century BCE. Its legendary foundation is either by Caranas or Perdiccas. So one of those two was the first sort of leader of Macedon with a distinct language, or distinct Greek-speaking population. Not necessarily a different language, but a distinct population within ancient Greece. Before the 4th century BCE, Macedonia was a small kingdom outside the area dominated by great city-states of Athens, Sparta, and Thebes, sort of slightly smaller than these at the time. briefly subordinate even to the Achaemenid Persia. So Macedonia was even conquered by the Achaemenid Empire. Philip II and the Macedonian reforms in 359 to 336 BCE. One of the most pivotal figures in Macedonian history was Philip II, who became king in 539 BCE. Philip embarked on a series of military, political, and economic reforms that transformed Macedonia from a fragmented state into a formidable power. His innovative military strategies, including the introduction of the Sarissa and the Macedonian phalanx, revolutionized warfare. So maybe if it weren't for those, the Sarissa and the phalanx of Philip II, perhaps Alexander the Great maybe never would have been as great as he became. As for expansion into Greece in 359 to 338 BCE, Philip sought to expand Macedonian influence in Greece, and through a combination of diplomacy, alliances, and military conquests, he brought many Greek city-states under his control. So Alexander the Great wasn't the only conqueror, a Macedonian conqueror. His father, Philip II, was very significant as well. The Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE solidified Macedonian dominance over Greece. So Macedon was already growing before Alexander the Great came into power. The Macedonian kings, for a little backstory, who wielded absolute power and commanded state resources, so completely public resources, such as gold and silver, facilitated mining operations to mint currency, financed their armies, and by the reign of Philip II, a Macedonian navy as well. So this is one of the earliest empires that we have covered to have a navy. Unlike other diadochi, or successor states, the imperial cult fostered by Alexander was never adopted in Macedonia, so that was sort of an invention of his own. Yet Macedonian rulers nevertheless assumed roles as high priests, so somewhat similar in a way to some of the Egyptian empires of the kingdom, and leading patrons of domestic and international cults of Hellenistic religions. The authority of Macedonian kings was theoretically limited to the institution of the army, while a few municipalities within the Macedonian Commonwealth enjoyed a high degree of autonomy and even democratic governments with popular assemblies. So they sort of ruled through the army, but nonetheless there was some autonomy between some of the city-states. Moving to the reign of Alexander the Great, 336 to 323 BCE, a short period, starting with the ascension of Alexander, 336 BCE. After the assassination of Philip in 336 BCE, his son Alexander, later known as Alexander the Great, took the throne at the age of 20. There's, I was going to maybe discuss it later, but maybe I'll discuss it now. There's two really particular stories between Philip II and Alexander the Great that stood out to me in Plutarch's Parallel Lives, and I can never really forget them. Firstly, it's that there was this horse, that Bucephalus, that no person could tame, and Philip II was observing this, and all the tough men of Macedon were not able to tame it, but young Alexander comes up and he's able to, sort of like a horse whisperer, he points the horse towards his son because the horse was afraid of his shadow, and sort of tames the horse and jumps on and rides into the sunset. And when he returns, he runs back, Philip II says, "Alexander, you must leave Macedon, for it is too small for you." So I think it's just very prideful and sort of a coming of age story. But on the flip side, Philip II had another son, and was even contesting the throne and not giving. Alexander was the sort of supposed to be the hereditary leader, and he felt underappreciated. He felt as though him and his mother, Olympia, were being squeezed out of their rightful inheritance. So they're both very drunk at this time. Alexander is still very young, and his father is still very was completely powerful, but also very drunk. And Alexander the Great, I can't remember the specific words, but he calls out his father and he says something along the lines of, like, why don't you give me more power, and you drunk old fool, or something like that. I don't have the exact lines. I don't have my copy of Plutarch's Parallel Lives with me, but nonetheless his father challenges him, and he gets up and he falls down because he's too drunk, and sort of another part of the coming of the age story in that, and sort of Alexander scoffs him that his father sort of lost the right to be in power, sort of in front of the eyes of all the people, and nonetheless, sort of a nuanced. I think these two stories I find are important because it's a nuanced relationship between Philip II and Alexander the Great, in that he had much pride in his son in the horse story, but they also did fight too, and nonetheless Alexander the Great did become his heir, but maybe him and his mother were the cause of his assassination. But nonetheless, it's a nuanced story, and I think nobody has a perfect relationship with their father. So as for the reign of Alexander the Great, so starting with his conquest of Persia from 334 to 330 BCE, Alexander embarked on his legendary campaign to conquer the Persian Empire. He achieved stunning successes, defeating King Darius in the key battles like Issus in 333 BCE and Gaugamela in 331 BCE. By 330 BCE, Persia was under his control. So the great Persian Empire, from the Achaemenid Empire, which was the largest the world had ever seen, was sort of pretty quickly defeated by Alexander the Great. Expansion into Asia and India in 329 to 326 BCE, Alexander continued eastward, reaching as far as the Bias River in India. His armies faced formidable challenges, notably the Battle of Hydaspes against King Porus. However, Alexander's troops eventually mutinied and turned back towards Persia. So if they had not mutinied, maybe Alexander could have made it, but maybe it was maybe the mutiny was rightfully deserved. There's a really great movie called Mutiny on the Bounty, and sort of at the end of the movie, sorry for the spoiler, you can maybe skip ahead 15 seconds if you don't want it to spoil it, but it's a very old movie. I doubt many people would still be interested in watching it, although I was, because my grandfather, who unfortunately passed away in 94 just recently, but nonetheless it was one of his favorite movies. But at the end of the book there's a mutiny on the boat, and there's a death penalty in England for having a mutiny, but at the end they win the trial because it was justified mutiny. So the point is that, and kind of the story of Crime and Punishment, in that they say the epilogue ruins Crime and Punishment because it has a happy ending, but the point is that I think Dostoevsky was trying to point to, and Mutiny on the Bounty is trying to point, is sometimes murder is justified. Also, spoiler alert, the Three Musketeers as well. As for the Hellenistic period, from 323 to 168 BCE, Alexander's death in the Wars of the Diadochi in 323 to 301 BCE. After Alexander's untimely death in 323 BCE, his empire was divided among his generals, known as the Diadochi. This led to a series of conflicts known as the Wars of the Diadochi, as they vied for control over different regions of the empire. As for the successor states, the empire fractured into several Hellenistic states, each ruled by one of Alexander's generals. Notably, among them were the Seleucid Empire in the east, and the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia, and the Attalid dynasty in Asia Minor, so significantly fractured into many different empires, some of which we will cover, both directly, some directly, and some through in connection with other empires. As for the Roman conquest and the end of Macedon in 168 BCE, Macedon and Rome, from the 200s to 100s BCE, Macedon, under the Antigonid dynasty, faced internal strife and external threats. Rome became increasingly involved in Macedonian affairs. So the Macedonian Wars in 214 to 148 BCE, Rome, seeking to expand its influence in the eastern Mediterranean, engaged in a series of conflicts with Macedon. The Third Macedonian War in 171 to 168 BCE resulted in the defeat of Macedon by Rome. As for the Macedon as a Roman province from 146 to the 4th century BCE, so they were defeated by Rome in 148 BCE, 168 BCE, and became a province in 146 BCE, all the way into the 4th century of BCE, the decline of Rome. After their victory, the Romans divided Macedon into 4 separate republics. But divide and conquer might be the term to use. In 146 BCE, it was officially annexed as a Roman province after the fall of Corinth. This was followed in 146 by the Roman destruction of Carthage and the victory of the Achaean League in the Battle of Corinth, ushering in the era of Roman Greece, and the gradual establishment of the Roman province of Macedonia, starting in 146 BCE. Thus, the history of Macedonia, from its rise under Philip II to its eventual absorption into the Roman Republic, left an indelible mark on the course of ancient history. Maybe that's an exaggeration. There was still growth within Macedon before Philip II, but Philip II was really one of the great conquerors next to Alexander. And the legacy of the Macedonian military innovations, cultural exchange, and spread of Hellenistic culture endured for centuries to come. Now into the life of Philip II of Macedon, very important leader. So his life period was from 382 BCE to 336 BCE. So starting with his early life and ascension from 382 to 359 BCE, his birth and heritage. Philip II was born in Pella, the ancient capital of Macedon, in 383 or 382 BCE. He was the youngest son of King Amyntas III. His family had ties with the ancient Macedonian royal house of the Argeads. He was the youngest son of King Amyntas and Eurydice of Lynketsis. He had two older brothers, Alexander II. Alexander the Great is actually Alexander III, and Perdiccas III. Perhaps the first leader of Macedon was Perdiccas I, as well as a sister named Eurino. Amyntas later married another woman, Gygia, with whom he had three sons: Philip's half-brother Archelaus, Arrhidaeus, and Menelaus. So it's interesting that he came to be the leader despite having so many brothers and so many other descendants, not even being the oldest of the first wife. Interesting, in the Old Testament, Joseph is Jacob's favorite son. He is, I believe, number 11, but he's the eldest son of Leah, who's Jacob's second wife. And the only line in the Old Testament that references why he's his favorite son is the line is that he was the son of his adulthood. So take what we will with that. As for exile and education, following political turmoil, Philip's family was exiled from Macedon when he was a child. During this time abroad, he received a comprehensive education, including military training and exposure to Greek philosophy and culture. A brief side note that I maybe should have mentioned earlier when talking about Alexander was that Alexander the Great was a student of Aristotle. And apparently even Alexander asked Aristotle to not, the writings that we have of Aristotle, some of it hides some of it that was taught to Alexander. One of the big disputes between Alexander and Aristotle was that Aristotle believed in this hierarchy of animals and peoples, and even thought there was somewhat of a race in the sense that he wanted to enslave the conquered people, whereas Alexander the Great actually believed that people should be treated equally, and rather than enslave people, they should treat them as citizens. As for Philip II's return to Macedon in 359 BCE, after a series of political intrigues and assassinations within the Macedonian court, Philip was invited back to Macedon to assume the throne after his brother's death. So I think it's that he became the leading successor after this exile. As for reforms and consolidation from 359 to 336 BCE, starting with military reforms, one of Philip's most significant contributions was his innovative military reforms. He transformed the Macedonian army into a highly disciplined and professional force, inducing the famous Macedonian phalanx formation and the use of the long spear called the sarissa. As for his diplomatic skill, Philip was a shrewd diplomat. He understood the importance of alliances and used marriage alliances to strengthen Macedon's position in Greece. Maybe somewhere where he differs from Alexander, that Alexander was maybe less focused on diplomacy and was just a pure conqueror. As for his conquest of northern Greece, Philip set about consolidating power in northern Greece. He achieved this through a combination of military conquests and political maneuvering, using both force and diplomacy to bring Greek city-states under his control. As for the League of Corinth in 338 BCE, This year, 338 BCE, Philip successfully united most of Greece under the League of Corinth, an alliance he led. This coalition aimed to counter Persian influence and plan a campaign to liberate Greek cities in Asia Minor from Persian rule. So something that unites empires sometimes, as in this case, is an external threat. So he united people, the Greek states, under the Corinth League against the Persian Empire. As for his marriage and family, the kings of Macedon practiced polygamy. Philip II had 7 wives throughout his life, all members of royalty from foreign dynasties. So that's how he's strengthening the empire through marriage, and all of which were considered queens, making their children royalty as well. As far as I know, Alexander the Great, I don't believe, ever even had 1 wife, but maybe he did. I'll have to reread Plutarch's Parallel Lives, or perhaps go back into my own episode on Alexander the Great to find out. As for assassination and legacy, 336 BCE. Tragically, Philip's life was cut short when he was assassinated in 336 BCE during his daughter's wedding banquet. The assassin, Pausanias, had personal motives, but some historians speculate that there may have been political motivations behind it. The plot maybe even coming from Olympia, his first wife, the mother of Alexander. As we noted, they had a nuanced relationship between him and Alexander. He had much pride in the son for periods, but they also did argue too, so it's a nuanced relationship. But I think they did still have much affection for each other. I think whenever I observe fathers and sons fight, I think it's a special thing, because the father has a certain right to be able to argue with his son, and other men can't necessarily do, because they're bound together in some sense. So it's kind of a fascinating experience. As for legacy, Philip's reign laid the foundation for his son, Alexander the Great, to embark on his legendary conquests. I think there's no other way to put it but legendary. The military reforms and political strategies implemented by Philip were instrumental in Alexander's later successes. So Alexander the Great may be one of the greatest conquerors of all time, if not the greatest conqueror. Maybe he would have been much less if there weren't for the successes of his father. And innovations as well, military innovations and alliances, such as the saris, the spear, and the phalanx, the military formation. As for cultural impact, Philip's reign marked a pivotal period for ancient Greek history, known as the Macedonian hegemony. It saw a blending of Macedonian and Greek culture, as well as the redefinition of the Greek political landscape. As for historical assessment, Philip II is often seen as one of the most astute and capable rulers of ancient Greece. His military innovations and political acumen transformed Macedon from a fragmented and vulnerable state into a formidable regional power. Philip II's influence extended far beyond his own lifetime, as his achievements and strategies continued to shape the course of history through the exploits of his son, Alexander, and the legacy of the Macedonian Empire. So that is Philip, I would even say, Philip the Great as well. Maybe much less covered. Plutarch does not have a biography of Philip II, but he does of Alexander the Great. But Philip II was one of the significant leaders throughout history, and perhaps critical in the establishment of and creation of Alexander the Great. So we'll now discuss the content of the slide. So in the title we have Philip II and the Macedonian Empire, also considered the Alexandrian Empire, or the leading empire in the world at its height. Significant leader, Philip II, that we covered. Empire, Macedon. Period, circa 700 to 148 BCE. Modern location, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Israel/Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, and India. So huge area. Million square kilometers, 5.20. Million square miles, 2.01%. of the world, a whopping 3.86%, almost 4 times the size of most of the other largest empires we have covered. It must be noted, though, however, the Achaemenid Empire was 5.5 million square kilometers, or 4.08% of the world. So supposedly, the Achaemenid Empire was still larger than the peak of the Macedonian Empire under Alexander the Great. So, small detail, but important to note. Capital, Agai before 399 BCE, and Pella from 399 to 168 BCE. Government was a hereditary monarchy. Common language, ancient Macedonian, Attic, and Koine Greek. Religion, Greek polytheism, and Hellenistic religion. Population, several millions. However, if we include all the conquered people, it would be significantly higher, in the maybe tens of millions, 20 millions, including vast regions in Asia. It's estimated the Achaemenid Empire was maybe between 20 to 35 million, so perhaps somewhere very close to that if we are to include all the conquered peoples. In terms of images, in the top left we have an image of Philip II. As a nose has been slightly broken off, there's a great poem by Ozymandias by Percy, the wife of Mary Shelley, in fact, and a husband of Percy Shelley, the wife of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. But nonetheless, he has this beautiful poem called Ozymandias, and there's this great, it's talking about this great sculpture, but it's in ruins. Ozymandias, here lies the great Ozymandias, but the point is, no matter how great one is, their statue eventually gets neglected, and here their nose is broken. And I've had been hit in the face a couple times, not necessarily by people all the time, but kind of seeing that all these great people in history, bad things happen to them. Noses are fragile, people are fragile, and even if you're someone as great as Philip II, people won't be able to watch out for your nose throughout all of history. So that's kind of nice small side note. To the right of that we have the Virginia sun, which is the symbol of the Argead dynasty. To the right we have some coins that were minted and used by the Macedonians. Supposedly Alexander the Great is on that coin to the left, and that would be his horse, Bucephalus. To the right we have also on the tomb of Xerxes, Ionians with shield hats, an old Persian cuneiform depicting on the tomb of Xerxes I at Nash-e-Rastam, which is probably Macedonian soldiers in the service of the Achaemenid Empire. So we saw at the previous empire, they had their pointed hats. As we can see here, the Sythian empires are on the same tomb with their pointed hats, and here on the same tombs the Macedonians had their rounded hats, but both of them fought for the Achaemenid Empire for a period. Below that we have the entrance of the Tomb of Virginia, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Below that we have some historical shortened timeline. So we have the legendary foundation by either Caranus or Perdiccas I in the 7th century BCE, the vassal of Persia from 512 to 511 to 543 BCE, that's when they were under Persian control, incorporation into the Persian Empire fully in 592 to 479 BCE, rise of Macedon 359 to 336 BCE, founding of the Hellenic League or the Corinth League 338 to 337 BCE against the Persians, and conquest of Persia in 335 to 323 BCE, partition of Babylon 323 BCE, wars of Diadochi 322 to 275 BCE, and the Battle of Pydna and 168 BCE, where they're finally defeated. And to the right we have this construction, which was commissioned by Philip II of the Philippeion Olympia to commemorate the victory in the Battle of Chaeronea. So beautiful structure. Above that we have a map, and I chose to actually show the map under Philip's rule. So as we can see, it's borders on Thrace and borders on Thessaly and significant land, and we see that the size of the Persian Empire and why they needed to create a league against them. This is the kingdom of Macedon after the death of Philip II. So this is what Alexander the Great inherited in 336 BCE. So that is Philip II and the Macedonian Empire. We will now discuss Ateas of the Sythian Empire and Philip II of the Macedonian Empire in the comparison, the style of Plutarch's Parallel Lives. In Plutarch's Parallel Lives, often sometimes they're great matches, sometimes they're not great matches. This time I think they're rather quite different, but nonetheless we will see what we can learn, if we can learn more about them through the ways in which they're different. So starting with their background and origins, Ateas of Sythia. Ateas was a prominent Scythian leader who emerged during the 4th century BCE. He hailed from the Scythian nomadic tribes of Central Asia, known for their mastery of mounted warfare and archery. As for Philip II of Macedon, he was the king of Macedon from 359 to 336 BCE. So it's possible they even, actually their lives did not coexist, but nonetheless they lived at times pretty similar, close. He was born into the ancient Macedonian royal house of the Ateas and spent part of his youth in exile. So both of them came from powerful families. Philip II came from probably the leading family. Ateas came from maybe the leading chieftain family, but nonetheless not as centralized ruler authority as Philip II inherited. But Philip II spent some of his youth in exile, so maybe although he came with benefits and costs in that, he also put him at great risk, and it wasn't certain that he would have the throne. As for their military achievements, starting with Ateas of Sythia, Ateas is known for successful resistance against the Achaemenid Persian Empire, particularly in the late 4th century BCE. A very formidable feat in that many of the Greek states had to unite just to achieve similar ends. He demonstrated tactical prowess in warfare, effectively uniting the Scythian tribes under his leadership. As for Philip II of Macedon, Philip is renowned for his transformative military reforms in Macedon, creating the most formidable armies of the time, including the Saris, the spear, and the phalanx formation. He introduced innovations in Macedonian phalanx and the sarissa, a longer spear which greatly enhanced the effectiveness of his troop. I used to have a debate with one of my roommates about what would be the best weapon in battle. Obviously the sword looks cool, but the spear we might actually agree might have been the most effective, because you can keep a distance unless they can break the distance of a spear. A sword is not very effective. As for expansion and conquest, starting with Ateas of Sythia, Ateas led campaigns against external threats, notably the Persians, but his conquests were primarily in defense of Scythian territory, so not necessarily an aggressor, as we might see with Philip II, or even more so Alexander the Great. His influence was concentrated in Central Asian steppes and adjacent regions. As for Philip II, he pursued an aggressive expansionist policy in Greece, unifying many Greek city-states under his authority through a combination of diplomacy and military conquests. His ambitions extended beyond Greece, planning campaigns against the Persian Empire before his assassination. So maybe his visions of conquering the Persian Empire, maybe if he wasn't assassinated, maybe he would have done it. Maybe he could have done better than Alexander. But nonetheless, maybe he planted those ideas in Alexander's mind. But nonetheless, it differs very much from the philosophy of Ateas or many of the other Scythians, in that they wanted to sort of focus more on defense, didn't really want to go out and conquer everyone they could. As for their legacy and impact, Ateas' legacy lies in his ability to unify disparate Scythian tribes and successfully defend Scythian territories against external threats, particularly the Persians. His influence contributed to the stability and cohesion of the Scythian Empire during his reign. As for Philip's reign, marked a pivotal period in Greek history known for the Macedonian hegemony. His military and political innovations laid the foundation for his son, Alexander the Great, to undertake legendary conquests. His legacy extended through the achievements of Alexander and the subsequent Hellenistic period, which he saw the spread of Greek culture throughout Asia and the Middle East. I put the caveat here that maybe if Ateas lived at the time of Philip II, maybe he also would have had ambitions to conquer Persia, because Persia was slightly weaker at that time. As for diplomatic acumen, starting with Ateas of Sythia, while Ateas demonstrated skill in military leadership, there was limited historical record regarding his diplomatic endeavors, whereas Philip II was a shrewd diplomat who understood the importance of alliances, often one of his 7 wives, many of whom were, all of whom were royal family and were done for alliances. He used marriage alliances to strengthen Macedon's position in Greece and consolidate power. As for assassination and untimely death, the exact circumstances of Ateas' death remain uncertain, as historical records from this period are limited. As for Philip II of Macedon, he was assassinated in 336 BCE during his daughter's wedding banquet. The assassin, Pausanias, had personal motives, but there may have been political motivations behind the plot as well. Thus, Ateas and Philip II were both influential leaders in their respective regions and areas. While Ateas was a significant figure in Scythian history, primarily known for his resistance against Persian incursions, Philip II's reign marked a transformative period in Greek history, with enduring impacts on military tactics, political strategies, and cultural exchanges. So quite different styles of leaders, both very fascinating empires, and I think they both sort of manifest the spirit of their two respective empires. Scythian Empire was sort of many different tribes, and Ateas was sort of one of the most dominant ones, whereas Macedon under both Alexander and Philip, maybe it's a legacy of Philip II, was really focused on external expansion, but unlike Alexander, Philip was a little bit more focused on diplomacy. So I hope that comparison maybe shed a little bit more details about both leaders and both respective empires. Thank you very much. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. This is Cashcroft TV, and this is an episode of Ages of Empires, and I very much hope you continue to support, and I'm thankful for your support so far. Thank you so much.